The story we're often told about the end of the British Empire, it's usually pretty tidy, right? Peaceful, mostly consensual. But what if that whole story was, well, a lie? A carefully built facade to hide something much, much darker. Today, we're getting into it. We're talking hidden files, a brutal uprising, and a system of torture that went right to the top. I mean, it sounds like something straight out of a spy movie, doesn't it? But this isn't fiction. This is real. For 50 years, the British government managed to bury a really dark chapter of its colonial past. And honestly, the story of how these secrets were uncovered is just as wild as the secrets themselves. And the key to unlocking this whole thing, it comes down to this one collection of documents. We're talking more than 1,500 top-secret files. For decades, officials just flat out denied they existed. Poof, gone. But inside them was the raw, ugly truth about the last, bloody years of British rule in Kenya. So before we even crack open these files, we've got to understand their journey. I mean, it's an incredible story in its own right. How on earth does a government keep its darkest secrets under wraps for 50 years? And what or who finally dragged them out into the sunlight? Okay, so check this out. It's 1963. Kenya is about to get its independence. And what happens? British officials quietly pack up these 1,500 files and ship them to the UK. They get stashed at the super secure facility, Hanslope Park. And for almost 50 years, silence. Anytime someone asked about them, the answer was always, nope, don't exist. It wasn't until 2011, when a group of elderly Kenyan veterans sued the government, that they were finally forced to admit, okay, yeah, we have them. But even then, the government quickly settled out of court. Why? Because they were terrified of what would happen if those details were read out loud for the whole world to hear. And when they announced that settlement, the UK Foreign Secretary at the time, William Hague, was so careful with his words. He said the government regretted what happened. But, and this is the key part, he basically tried to blame it all on the colonial administration out in Kenya. Like they were some separate entity. He was trying to build a firewall, right, to keep the blame from reaching London. The problem is, as those files would show, that firewall was made of paper. It was a complete fiction. All right, so to really get what they were so desperate to hide, we need to rewind. Let's go back to Kenya in the 1950s. Picture this. A colony just simmering with anger and resentment, a pressure cooker that was about to blow its lid in one of the most violent chapters in the entire history of the British Empire. And this right here is the absolute heart of the conflict. The contrast is just staggering. On one side, you have this tiny elite of white settlers, living these lavish lives on massive estates, and on the other, the Kikuyu people. It was their ancestral land, but they'd been forced off it, and now they were working for the very people who took it. It was a system built on deep, deep inequality. And out of that injustice, the Mau Mau movement was born. Their goal was simple, their slogan was simple: land and freedom. So, the story that people back in Britain were hearing, the one plastered all over the newspapers, it all boiled down to one number: 32. That's how many white civilians were killed by the Mau Mau. And look, the attacks were often horrific, there's no denying that, and they fed this very simple narrative of, savage terrorists attacking innocent settlers. But that number, 32, it completely obscures a much bigger, much more brutal truth. The British response wasn't some surgical police operation. No way. It was an all-out counterinsurgency. Tens of thousands of Kenyans were rounded up, thrown into detention camps, and put through a system of institutionalized violence. And this is what those hidden files were all about. This wasn't a few bad apples, a couple of rogue officers going too far. This was a calculated, systematic program of torture, and it had one goal: to break the will of the Kenyan people. They even gave it a name, a clean, almost clinical-sounding name. They called it the dilution technique. Sounds harmless, right? But the goal was anything but. The idea was to take the toughest detainees, the ones they called the hardcore, and just break them. Use whatever force was necessary to make them confess and give up their loyalty to the Mau Mau. And just listen to the language these guys used. One of the architects of this whole system, a camp administrator named Terence Gavahan, he described what he was doing as manipulative force, not punitive force. It's such a chillingly bureaucratic phrase, isn't it? It's a classic euphemism, designed to hide the sheer brutality of what was going on in his camps. So, what did manipulative force actually look like in practice? Well, witness accounts, which, by the way, are now backed up by these newly discovered files, they paint a horrifying picture. We're talking castration with pliers, using broken bottles, making people dig their own graves. Just endless, systematic beatings and psychological terror. That was the dilution technique. And then you dig into the Hanslope files and you find the smoking gun in their own words. There's this one letter from that same administrator, Gavahan. He's talking about another officer who'd just been convicted for torturing a man to death. And then Gavahan writes that what his own team was doing was, quote, identical to what the convicted guy did. I mean, come on, it's a direct confession, right there in black and white. And the thing is, this wasn't some secret operation happening in the dark. These newly revealed documents make it crystal clear. The colonial administration in Kenya knew exactly what was going on. And so did the officials back in London. They didn't just know about it, they actively worked to cover it all up. So how'd they pull that off? Easy. They set up a justice system that was a total joke. Here's how it worked. A complaint comes in, torture, murder, you name it, it gets sent to this official-sounding Governor's Complaints Committee. But then, who does the committee talk to for advice? The colleagues of the guy being accused. And big surprise, his buddies would say, nah, don't prosecute. Case closed. It was a perfect little circle, designed to look like it was doing something while actually doing nothing. And the numbers that came out of this fake process, they're just staggering. This committee looked at over 350 cases. We're talking murder, rape, serious assault by colonial officials, and out of all those, they managed to shut down almost 300 of them. Fewer than 10% even saw the inside of a courtroom. It's unbelievable. And here's the kicker. This is the link that ties the cover-up in Kenya directly to London. The notes from these committee meetings, the very documents detailing how they were systematically squashing hundreds of cases of torture and murder, they were sent right up the chain. They landed smack on the desk of the Colonial Secretary in London. There's no ambiguity here. They knew. And to make this whole dirty business seem legal, the Colonial Attorney General got creative. He basically invented a new legal category. He said, look, there's a difference between illegal punitive force and, wait for it, perfectly acceptable compelling force. Compelling force was just the force you needed to get a confession. It was a brilliant, cynical loophole, a bit of legal jargon meant to make systemic torture sound okay. So you've got this brutal, officially sanctioned system of torture. It's a powder keg just waiting for a spark. And in 1959, it finally exploded. An event happened that was so shocking, so undeniable, that there was just no way to cover it up. And it would change everything for Kenya, forever. It was called the Hola Massacre. Here's what went down. A group of so-called hardcore prisoners at the Hola camp refused to do forced labor. The response? Guards with batons charged in and just beat them for hours. At the end of the day, 11 men had been beaten to death. 72 others were in the hospital. And the initial cover story? The first official line was that they died from drinking bad water. Seriously? But that lie didn't hold for long. The real story got out, and the political explosion was massive. The Hola Massacre created an absolute firestorm in the British Parliament. That carefully crafted image of Britain as this benevolent, civilizing force, it was just shattered overnight. The whole world could suddenly see what was really going on inside those camps. And really, the final outcome was inevitable at that point. The Hola scandal made it politically impossible for Britain to stay in Kenya. It blew the lid off the idea that independence was some kind of generous gift. No, it was sped up, forced, by the exposure of this extreme violence. The British government knew the game was up. They had to get out, and they had to get out fast. So for half a century, this whole chapter was buried, locked away, because someone decided it was too damaging for the public to know. But now that it's out, it forces us all to think about a really big question. Not just about Britain, but about any country. Does digging up a nation's darkest secrets make it weaker? Or does having the guts to finally face them head on actually make it stronger?